Thank you all for joining our webinar, Chaos to Clarity. We're going to be walking through some key project management tips and tricks and techniques and how they are applicable to the legal field. A quick call out is just that we do not have an active chat function, but if you want to go ahead and put any insights or any questions into our Q&A tool, we'll be sure to weave those in throughout the presentation. All right, so today we're going to be covering project management techniques, what they are, real world applications, and how they apply to the legal function. We're also going to be going through the role of legal intake and how your team plays a role in developing that process. We're also going to look at understanding more of the why behind the need for a process, not only as it relates to your team, but also as it relates to your organization as a whole, and just getting clear on the need for it and identifying any of those gaps before you start creating that process. And then finally, we're going to tie into some, prioritizing those strategic legal initiatives, as well as all of those day-to-day requests that I'm sure a lot of you get all the time. And then just how to employ those organizational tools that we're working through and methods and how to manage deadlines. So jumping in, my name is Colleen Matthews. I'm going to be moderating the panel today. I'm a product marketing manager here at LinkSquares, and I'm joined by my colleagues Tom and Jonathan. And Tom, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll move to Jonathan.
Thanks, Colleen. So as mentioned, my name's Tom Allen. I'm a program manager here at LinkSquares, primarily focused on two things. The first is working on process improvement and helping to scale our product and engineering organization. And the second half of that is figuring out how we can help the business work better with product and engineering, specifically around triaging and intaking various forms of feedback on the products that we build in an efficient manner. Prior to LinkSquares, I spent probably the better part of 8 years in consulting, focused on strategic systems implementation and organizational transformation. I think there's a lot of overlap between the work we're doing here and triaging the incredible volume of feedback and suggestions for enhancements that we get to the systems that we build here at LinkSquares, and the triage and intake of requests from across the business that I'm sure a lot of people on the call deal with on a daily basis. There's a lot of overlap in my head of those two concepts. So I'm excited to be part of this discussion and hear a little bit more about how things that we do could potentially translate and be applicable to the work that everyone here does. And hopefully give, at the end of the hour, people some good tips and tricks or just helpful suggestions or advice on things they can take away and use effective immediately.
Great. And then our third panelist is going to be Jonathan Greenblatt. He's the VP of Legal here at LinkSquares. It looks like he is going to try to rejoin. But our first slide is mainly focused around some key project management initiatives. So I'll dive into that with Tom. So this idea of tailoring project management for legal operations, I think it's important to first start at what are these key frameworks and how they have that real world value. So Tom, can you dive into a little bit maybe about not necessarily what each of these are, since we're going to be going into them a little bit further down the program, but just identifying what are we really trying to solve at the end of the day of implementing one of these processes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing to keep in mind throughout the webinar, and as you go back to your teams and start thinking about any process or any form of project management prioritization framework that you might want to implement, is at the end of the day, we're talking about what is a very simple concept, which is just how do you manage a shared task list. You can add on layers, you can add complexity and specific frameworks, you can make a detailed project plan, manage things through a chart or a shared system, but at the end of the day, it's just how do we effectively distribute work, things that have to get done to our team members so that we get the most important things done first. So later in the presentation, we'll talk through 3 different strategies and approaches to doing that. I think as we're talking and having this discussion, the key thing to remember is at the end of the day, it's just how do we take items on a list and give them to the right people at the right time to maximize our value for the business. Easier said than done. Some of the projects we were working on back in my consulting days, you've got teams of upwards of 400 to 500 people, which is a lot of tasks. It's a very long list. And as I think a lot of us know, you can put together a detailed project plan, you can put together the best process on the planet for your team, but you can't plan for everything. Things will come up, the plan will get derailed, there'll be things you didn't expect. But the frameworks we'll talk about today are meant to be almost just guardrails, boxes that you can think about to operate between. But at the end of the day, keeping a focus on what works best for my team. Let's be reactive and anticipate change happening. These are all great things. At the end of the day, it's just how do we get this list down to zero most effectively as possible as works for us.
Welcome, Jonathan. I did briefly introduce you, but if you want to give any additional background to your work here at Link Squares, and then I figure that we can dive in on these project management capabilities and just your lens of how working off of that shared task list is really important for the legal team.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Greenblatt. I'm the Vice President of Legal here at Link Squares, and this is a subject I'm really passionate about because it really changes how the legal team operates. We have a legal team of 4 here at Link Squares, and we are juggling so many projects and so many different types of projects that by implementing some of the things we're going to talk about today, I've just noticed a drastic improvement in the quality of the service that we've been delivering to our org. So really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I was just saying before you hopped on that at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a simple concept that's incredibly difficult to execute in the real world. And I was discussing how some larger projects I've worked on in the past, this shared management of the task list becomes a full-time job for 3 people, which I don't know about many other teams on the call, but I know certainly here at Link Squares, we just don't have the time to do that or the people. And anytime you involve even a small team like yourselves, more than one person involved in managing this list, it's not like the overhead of managing that becomes linear, where if you add one more person, it's twice as hard. 3 people, it's 3 times as hard. It's you actually get down to the nitty gritty of what we're doing, and it's exponential. 3 people's 9 times as hard, 4 people's 16 times as hard, with just the amount of triage and management you do. So the more you can just centralize things in a single place, have a process you can fall back on and agree on, you end up giving exponentially larger amounts of time back to your team to do what's important.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because you can spend almost more time communicating about your work than actually doing the work.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, Jonathan, as your team, you mentioned how small it is, as you've looked to implement a framework and kind of that process for your team, why did you initially feel that that was so important in this day and age?
Yeah, I mean, you are collaborating with multiple individuals, both within your team and then within the organization. And if it's not streamlined, it's just painful. So I think for me, it was just, how do I solve this pain? Because it was feeling very, very painful to have everything so scattered and not having a framework to organize it in. So trying to just address the pain, and having resources like Tom here at Link Squares, it's very valuable to get to see what other industries and folks who've actually been thinking about this problem of how do I manage the work, and getting their perspective on it. It's been just invaluable.
Yeah. And Tom, I know, expanding on that idea, like a lot of legal teams don't have those dedicated project managers. So what do you feel are some key areas that they could initially start to focus on to plug some of these gaps so it's not so overwhelming?
No, absolutely. It's a great question. And I know a lot of teams with the rise of the legal ops function are lucky enough to have what is, in my mind, becoming a very similar role that you typically see in a project or program manager function. But for a lot of teams out there, there's quite simply just not the budget, not the headcount gap to hire on a dedicated person to take on, that input triage tool configuration role that you would have in a dedicated legal ops or project management professional. And the benefits are really, it just emphasizes the value of your team to the business. The less friction, the smoother the handoffs, the more transparent outwards communication that you can see on the tasks you're working on, and more importantly, your business partners can see what you're working on and be felt looped in, bought into the process, see the value. You really do have to unblock that view of legal as slowing things down and really integrating of legal or a partner of ours. We see the value in this process. We see the value in what they do, and you end up with better outcomes for everybody across the business. It saves you time, it saves you money. It really just ties legal into the day-to-day operations of the company. The better you get at a smooth intake, smooth management, and smooth transparent output of what you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think I have a lot of friends who work with legal departments, and they will tell you they have very, very strong feelings, whether they really like working with their legal department or not. And it's not just about whether the legal department just reflexively approves whatever the matter is, so that the business folks can go and do, particularly, let's say in the contract example, just get the contract signed. It's not really about that. It's about, do they feel like the legal team's organized? Do they have transparency into their process? Do they have an understanding about how long something is going to take? Because if they do, they can manage around that. When they have none of that transparency, where they don't know where things are at, it's hard for them to manage their own processes.
Awesome. Unless either of you two have anything to add to this topic, I think I want to take a closer lens, just keeping these key foundations in mind, how this really relates to the legal intake process. So Jonathan, why do you feel that having that one standardized legal intake process is really critical for your team?
Yeah, because as I mentioned, you will spend more time communicating about work than doing the work if it's off in silos. You have no visibility into what is the work, particularly if you are working in a team that is going on within the entire team. Work will tend to get siloed into productivity tools like a Slack or Teams or email, and you don't have that full transparency into like what your team is working on. So one, it's about transparency. Two, it's just about the ability to actually see what the work is, because our work typically, outside of just answering questions that might be very easy to answer, involves some sort of time effort that is more than 2 minutes. And you typically cannot just interrupt exactly what you're doing right then and there and go and tackle whatever has just come in. Because sometimes, I don't know about folks on this call, but even today, there were probably 4 things that instantaneously came to me at once. And so I need to have it all put in a place where I will be able to go back to it and not forget. And it's certainly much easier when everything can come into one distinct area and you are not context switching to 4 or 5 different platforms just to figure out, what do I need to work on? And when we've now rolled out a legal intake process for not just contracts, but everything that comes into the legal org, including our own work that we have to manage ourselves, but want to make sure that we're providing internal visibility on, and also just so we do not forget. It's been a game changer having all of that work in one place for so many reasons. But I think the one that just comes off top of mind is it's just less things slip through the cracks. I would say one of the challenges we've had is as we've been rolling out this, is getting our internal stakeholders to conform to this new process. And so we've been working with Tom on that. So Tom, maybe if you don't mind jumping in and giving your perspective on this challenge, because from our discussions, it's not just legal teams that have this problem, it's other business teams who hire consultants to tackle this problem in and of itself. So maybe you could share what you've shared with me to our audience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's one of those things where if we do, to be honest, too good of a job at this, I'm talking myself out of a job. Change management, buy-in across an organization's pretty much the most difficult thing to do anytime you're trying to establish a process that's targeted towards one team. You're introducing change to what people are used to. You're potentially introducing new or different work, new tools that they're not used to. A lot of times we make the mistake critically of just focusing on the end user, which for the purposes of this discussion, we would classically think to be the legal team. But if you actually take a step back and think about this a little more, there's multiple stakeholders involved here. You want to be designing a process where somebody that needs to get something approved for procurement, can immediately know where that is in the workflow, understand, are my teams now going to be blocked? Are we on track? Where can I escalate this to get an update? How much work do I have to do? I think one of the biggest indicators in healthcare of patient care in hospitals is how well are people handing patients off between different departments? And the same concept applies to this. If you can get a smooth handoff between the information I'm handing Jonathan, where for a particular procurement request, we have certain security considerations, certain considerations regarding the terms and conditions that we don't like. And if I can provide that information smoothly upfront, as easily as possible to Jonathan's team, they're in turn able to do their work better and faster because there's less handoffs coming back to ask clarifications for me. And as a result, both of us are happier. Jonathan's team can get things out of the way faster because they have the information they need. I'm happier because I'm getting my things sent through procurement and approved or denied, so I can plan my work better. So I'd say anything that you're going to implement as an output of this discussion today, the single most critical part is don't forget your business stakeholders. Loop them in, involve them as you're designing the process, have them be early access users if you're implementing a tool. Workshop things with them in person or on Zoom. Do it together, because the more you get that buy-in up front and the more that you get people involved in a process that they're going to have to use, the more engaged they feel, the more satisfied they feel, and the more likely they are to actually do it once it becomes an official process in your business.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I actually had a law school classmate reach out to me, interested in contract management and project management. And so I gave him a bit of a rundown about what I think about. And one of the maybe second or third things I mentioned was, hey, and you need to make sure that whatever you're using integrates with the tools. For instance, in this case, it was the sales team, like the tools that your sales team use. And I asked a couple what I thought were basic questions about which platforms is your sales team using. And he gets back to me and goes, Jonathan, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that. I actually don't know. And so I said, before you even think about some sort of additional technology here, like understand where your folks are working so that you can help create a process that will maximize their ability to use whatever tools you're using or whatever process that you're creating.
Yep, it's the truth that APIs and integrations are the name of the game for the future in technology. It's the concept of work where you work. Applies for a legal intake process to an engineering process to a sales process. You basically want to minimize, however you can, the amount of extra things that you're asking people to do. Get them bought in early, allow them to do things they're used to, but cater towards the process, and just constantly reinforce and reiterate it. It's perfectly okay if people aren't doing things the right way from the start, but the more you coach people, the more you make it, quote unquote, the new norm, the more it's just going to feel like second nature to people. And as more and more people get bought in and start using your process, it's almost like one of those tidal waves that just keeps going. It's the more momentum you get, the more momentum you get. And the more buy-in you get, the more buy-in you get, because people across the org just stop seeing the process as painful and it's just part of this works for us. This has made things better. And the more they hear that from more people, it's just going to cascade throughout the rest of the organization. So that engagement, that buy-in early and often and repeatable, really the key focus of anything you try to do.
Hey, Tom, any recommendations you have around that coaching at the early stage of the process? Because I've seen colleagues in my legal department, when they roll out a process, they get very frustrated the first time somebody doesn't follow the process. And from my end, I think about some of the other business units processes that maybe I wasn't the best at following to a T. And so I have a little bit of empathy for them, but I could see sometimes a large stick being brought out for why didn't you follow the process? Do you think it's good to bring out those sticks early so people get in line, or do you think you just have to build in some breakage for a certain period of time after rolling out a new process?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of threefold. There's always an unnecessary factor at some point using that stick will be necessary. That's with any change you're trying to implement in an organization. There will always be people that you have to give a little bit of a harder nudge to get on board with than others. But if you're at the point where your only weapon that you can use is the stick, I would argue that you've probably failed in this transformation, not at that point in time, but 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months to a year ago. Ask questions early and often. Identify who are the actual people that are going to be involved in this process. One thing that we did struggle with from time to time going in and doing these transformations at my old company is where we would talk with people's managers and senior leaders about what should this look like, how should this work, and completely ignored the reality that when this new system was live, there's people on the ground that need to actually use this day in, day out. And when we roll things out that they've not been consulted on or bought into, or even just asked, does this work for you? You can get a yes from a lot of people, but if the people that are actually going to be involved in doing this process aren't looped in early and often, you're going to end up resorting to that stick pretty quickly, and that stick's not going to do anything. Your process will be broken fundamentally. I'd say your best investment you can make is get people bought in early that will be using your system. And when the push comes to shove and they're not really agreeing to what they did, that's when you kind of break out the smaller stick of, look, we talked about this. I sat down with you. I asked you questions and we agreed on this. Why isn't this working now? What's changed? Really be kind of a partner. And typically you'll see people start to either open up more and be more willing to adapt, or at the end of the day, you have to break out, unfortunately, sometimes the real stick and just force people into something until they're used to it. And that's just a fact of life.
Great. I think that's a good setup for where we're moving next, of just understanding understanding the why behind that process build and diving a little bit deeper into your organization. I know Jonathan's the one who surfaced this statistic as we were thinking through, project management and legal, right? Is a survey was done called the State of Collaboration in Corporate Legal Departments. Was the statistic came out of it, in which 70% of the almost 400 in-house legal professionals, they found that the top goal was to be better aligned with their business function. Like that was ultimately like what they were striving for. But also, according to those respondents, 58% of them had those cross-functional partners across the business, with this idea that legal slows them down, like slows down their projects. And another 40 or so percent saying, those processes are, too risk averse to try to switch up things and make them flow easier across the business. So I think that this goes to your point of like really proactively understanding the business units and what they need from your process, Tom. But how do you feel legal teams, or really anyone who's building this process, can proactively address these business pains, so that way they're building a framework that makes sense not only for them but also the entire organization?
No, it's a great question. And a lot of times something people struggle with is they jump straight to process without understanding the people and the outcomes first. Anything you do in a business to try and make something smoother, more streamlined, there has to be value behind it. The best thing I could recommend is upfront, you understand the touch points of where you work with the rest of the business. Sit down and connect with them and really hammer home, what are they trying to accomplish? What are their business objectives? Where is legal partnering in meeting those objectives, and how? Where are things not working currently? How can we make things better? From legal's perspective, why do certain guardrails exist that people might not understand? Really sitting down with folks, it can take time, it can be painful, but again, it's a repetitive theme throughout this webinar, I feel, is the more investment that you can make up front, the less pain you'll have further on. It's something that applies in software development. It's something that applies in process transformation. It's something that applies in just relationships. The more you invest early and often, the more you'll get out of that investment when it comes down to actually trying to implement something. Be transparent, just align on objectives of here's what we're trying to accomplish, not, hey, my team's overloaded and we're getting work from too many places, we need to cut this down. That tells me what your objectives are from a legal department's perspective. It does not tell me how that's going to make my life in product and engineering any easier. Let's work to understand each other better up front and contribute collaboratively to a process that works for both of us. And you'll find that the parts just start to fall into place after that initial upfront investment.
Right. And Jonathan, for your part, implementing this project management throughout LinkSquares, do you feel that was kind of easier for the team to understand the business values? Did you run into friction while you're trying to roll this out to the team? What was that experience like?
Yeah, good question. So I would actually say it was less friction. People were excited. The problem was, what we found was that we were maybe communicating with the folks at the wrong level. And this goes back to what you said, Tom, and this was a perfect example of it. You know, we mentioned we have a new project management tool. We have now one place you can go for intake, and we notified the senior leadership, here's the tool. We just, explained the tool. It's and what we expected out of it. Everybody seemed bought in at the senior leadership level. And then what we started seeing was that the folks under them were not following the process that we had discussed. We did not do training specific to anybody else within these other orgs. We kind of expected that our senior leadership would do that. And I think what we found is A, not to have that expectation, and then B, to start figuring out how you're going to communicate with folks if they follow the process that you thought you would perfectly cleanly laid out. What we hope is more transparency and faster response time by having all the efficiencies gained through legal intake and project management.
Just to summarize too, yeah, I was totally at fault for this, right? Being on the marketing team, being not directly in that legal function. For everyone on the call, I sat down with Tom and Jonathan and we're going through all these great ways and, how are we going to make the legal project management process like super sticky? And then within the next 2 hours or so, right? Like I had Jonathan in a Slack message and I was like, can you review this for me? And it was a gentle nudge, but it was like, you know what, here's our prioritized form. It's the product that you work on. Go ahead and fill that out and then we'll be able to track it better and get to it faster. So I think especially just being a part of the business unit and not necessarily the legal team, I think those gentle reminders are also, eventually they're going to get it. They're going to know where they need to bookmark it if it is a form, and it'll just be a much more seamless experience for everybody. So thanks for bearing with me, Jonathan.
I was gonna say, just because I personally did this wrong as well, you rolled this out. But I do think that's kind of one, it's very easy for me to sit here and say you should be looping in all your stakeholders up front. But for a lot of your organizations, that's just quite frankly not going to be realistic. And that's kind of where the concept of trying to identify like change champions or champions on your business unit side, who can then work with their peers to get things done and coach them and help them when the rollout does come. I submitted something hilariously wrong and it didn't get done. That's on me. I learned my lesson, but now in project engineering, when people are asking, how do I submit something to legal, where should I go? I'll sit down and coach with them as a peer to help talk them through the process. And they're not just hearing it then from an email or a org update or please bookmark this and use this. It's somebody they work with day to day that they know that they can rely on and talk to honestly. So having champions in whatever business units or orgs you're partnering with, when you do get to this rollout stage of whatever intake process you're trying to accomplish, will just necessarily lead to less friction with the wider group of people who may not have been clued in, who may have been out sick a particular week. They have a peer now instead of trying to go through something just documented somewhere that's very impersonal. So that's an excellent kind of trick and tactic you can pull as well.
Yeah, great. All right, moving on. I think that there's also this idea, this is all really great to say in practice and in principle, but how do we really put some of these to work when there's such a constant stream of those day-to-day requests, right? Like getting off of an hour webinar, you might come back to like 30 Slacks or emails of things that you have to do, but then you also have these overarching, strategic initiatives or, big rocks or those pieces that you need to do to be more effective long-term while also balancing the day-to-day needs of the business. So Jonathan, how do you feel, number one, can you give some examples maybe of those like really overarching initiatives that your team is working on? And then how have you been trying to balance that along with those day-to-day requests, right? Like of having a marketer come in and needing a review of a one-pager and not following the process.
Yeah, and I mean, all of that's important. I think with the legal team, the good and the bad is that everything we're doing is important for the business. It's important to that business stakeholder. And ultimately, it's important for the business to be able to achieve whatever the legal team is working on, which means there's an expectation that it's done within a certain time period. Obviously that said, we have big strategic initiatives, and it's going to differ from organization to organization, but these initiatives can align with the business and what the business is going through.
Tom, I think that this, applies to the entire business, right? Like we all do have like those larger bodies of work that we have to work through. So what are your recommendations for pairing that along with just like the day-to-day business needs?
It's probably the oldest issue in business or anything really. It's how do we accomplish the goals that we want to achieve with just the necessary volume of things that we have to do. And to be honest, it's not what people are going to like to hear, but there's just no clear-cut answer here. The needs of your businesses will all be unique to each other. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. And to be honest, and not to sound too bleak about it, but the best that you can hope for is to find the balance that works for you. Having everything in one place where you can stat rank what's important and justify that value helps. Being able to see everything in one place and be able to think about how much effort this will take, how much value does this add to the business in one place helps give you that transparency and the tools that you can do to balance things. And the less that you're searching through emails and Slacks or Teams messages or even people walking up to your desk, you're never going to be able to get a handle on that. It's having things in one place where you can make a decision as a business of this is how we prioritize work. And unfortunately, we don't have unlimited resources. We make the best of what we're given with, and making sure everyone understands what goes into justifying that prioritization. You do end up seeing that people start to get it. It's something that we have to deal with on the product and engineering side is our customers are always coming to us with, it'll be great if we had this feature. I would love it if you fix this bug faster. And at the end of the day, we're presented with just very, very difficult decisions that with the resources we have, there might be 100 things on the list and we can only get to 20. But by clearly communicating why we picked those 20, why we chose those 20 over the 80 other things we're not doing, the value behind those, you end up helping to smooth over people when you can't get to the things that they need. So it's a very nebulous, difficult question to answer. Everyone will have what their business needs and what's important and what's critical to their business. A lot of times people in different departments don't really understand that criticality, and educating them on what it truly is important for the company is key. And then also to put some form of how much work do we think this is, which we'll kind of get into in a few slides, also helps you balance that effort versus value trade-off that you're always going to be in a position, whether it's at work, your personal life, of where do you invest your time and energy.
Yeah, definitely.
It's unfortunately just the way it is.
Yeah, and before moving on to, I know in speaking with Jonathan, and I think that this is true for a lot of our folks on the phone, is legal teams especially are living in that urgency of the day-to-day requests. There's always those deals that have to get closed. There's always those, random pieces that need to get reviewed ASAP or else. So I think, building in that buffer time of having, say, like, I can block off a Friday afternoon and think that I'm going to be able to devote that to some of those larger long-term initiatives, whether it's, prepping for fundraising or, preparing for an M&A or anything like that. And, best laid plans that we're probably not actually going to be able to devote the afternoon to that because there's going to be 50 really urgent pieces that are coming in via Slack too. So I think building in some proactive buffer of just almost understanding like you're not just going to be able to time block for some of these pieces, and even getting that leadership buy-in, right? Like having them set up more so those SLAs of what legal can and cannot feasibly do, I think will go a long way in helping everyone prioritize some of that work.
No, absolutely. I don't think I've built a project plan in my life where we've not introduced buffer into the plan up front of we know things will slip. We know we'll need capacity that's unplanned for, and therefore the timeline is just going to take this long. It's a necessary thing. It's always built in a couple of hours a week, unexpectedness. Everybody's got a plan. I think it's one of the famous boxer sets, so they get hit, and you have to anticipate that in your business relationships too. Don't plan to get everything done and maximize all 40, 45 hours of your work week. Plan to get 30 hours of work done, and what you'll naturally find is those extra 10, 15 hours of your work week are going to get filled up with things, and you'll actually end up conveniently for the next slide being more on track for your deadlines because you're setting more realistic deadlines up front with people.
Yeah, and I think that's the big issue, right? Is some of these deadlines, they might be more arbitrary. They might not have to be the ones that you necessarily have to hit. You can maybe push them. And then there's going to be those pieces that, there's just really no wiggle room in it. There's a certain day today that has to be met in order to fulfill a business need. What are some tips or tooling that you would lay the groundwork as to ensure that those deadlines are getting met?
Yep, I think it's very particular to this industry that we're all in. It's triaging out your initial set of tasks. You might have your one big board where all the tasks come into, and just doing that frontline pass every week with your team of what is a deadline that we have to hit versus a deadline that we would like to hit. A lot of the industry, it's even in finance, in healthcare, it's you are filing your 10K on time. There's no excuses. You're doing it or the market gets very unhappy with you. That's a hard deadline you can't move. And if there's other work that's due around the same time period, well, to be honest, that is a nice to have, but it's not business critical. So always focusing on is what are the things outside of our control that we have to do, and making sure that the teams hit those critical deadlines, and then going through and looking at the rest of the work of this is what's important, yes, but not part of our critical path. That's kind of like, at least when we look at things that we're building from an engineering perspective, that's the tactic we take. What do we need to do to make this happen? What do we have to do to make this happen? Versus what would be nice, but you know what, if it doesn't hit in time for June, it doesn't hit in time for June, that's not the end of the world. Having everything just kind of in front of your team, the same board everyone can work off and understand and see these things and collaboratively walk through things. Just make it a weekly practice or bi-weekly. We do bi-weekly prioritization here from an engineering perspective, and just constantly reevaluating what's come in, what's critical, what has to happen, what's nice to have, and communicate that out to your stakeholders accordingly.
Right.
That's kind of the key part that always goes unmentioned of don't just sit on things and ignore them. If something has to push, something has to push, but let me know about it. If we can't get to a request because it's the end of the month and there's a lot of sales contracts we have to renew, I'm okay with that. I understand. That is more important for the business than me asking for more Jira licenses. That can wait till next. I understand that. Just let me know. Just communicate proactively and early.
Cool. And we actually got a quick question in the chat. The question was, do you all allow your business partners access to prioritize? If so, how do you balance providing that transparency to the business while maintaining the sensitivity of those projects that you might be working on and tracking and prioritize, but that the business shouldn't be able to see? And Tom, feel free to chime in as well. But yes, I had a few of our team favorites, but our team does use prioritize for all of those tasks. And it is helpful because it can centralize them on all one spot. But to Aaron's point, how are you making sure that, Colleen from marketing isn't seeing some of those large scale bodies of work that they're working on?
So it depends on the task type. So obviously, if it's something sensitive like a litigation or a dispute, we keep that internal to the legal team, but we have the ability and prioritize to essentially decide when our business stakeholders will be collaborating with us on a prioritized project and when they're not, and we're able to set that those defaults and also decide if we need to add someone. So I think if it's something sensitive, then we would certainly keep all the business stakeholders out of it and keep members of the legal team who don't need to know out of it as well. But for something like marketing collateral review, it's really helpful for us to see some of the same work, and so we would interact with them, on the same project. But this is something, just from a product perspective, we are trying to sort of figure out many of the different ways that legal teams will want to collaborate. But right now, that's the way we do it.
Great. So wrapping up with kind of these key methodologies that, teams can employ. Some of these are a little bit more structured maybe towards like an engineering team, but really any project management methodology can be applied to whatever business unit. So Tom, I know you added kind of this weighted shortest job first methodology. Can you expand a little bit more on the why behind that method and maybe how legal teams can utilize that?
Absolutely. So this is a method of prioritization and managing and picking up your work that, you're right, it has very heavy engineering backgrounds in terms of how you prioritize what tasks for engineers to pick up and when. But it's applicable to really everything in life. I use this for chores on a Sunday. It's effectively what you do is you take your task list at any given point in time, and based on your personal business problems and business objectives, you assign a value to each of those tasks. And it can be any system you want. It can be high, medium, low. It can be 1 to 100, 1 to 10, 1 to 5, doesn't matter. What value is this going to provide us? And the second exercise you then take is how long is it going to take us? Is it going to be a day of work, a few hours of work? Oh, I can bang this out in 5 minutes. And you balance those. You quite literally just divide the value over the effort and prioritize your work accordingly so you get the highest return on investment up front. And what this lets you balance is there might be significant tasks of, let's help prepare the S1 filing to go public. That's got an insane amount of value tied to it and an insane amount of time tied to it, versus tasks that might have a lot of time tied to them, but relatively little value. What are you going to focus your time on? It's what matters most. It's an exercise that you'll want to take with your teams on a recurring cadence, because more tasks will come in to be intaked and triaged. But what you'll find is if you apply this method of balancing value and time and effort, you end up accomplishing much more strategic things and also getting to a lot of the little tactical items. If something's worth $100 and it takes me 100 hours versus something's worth $20 and it takes me 1 hour, I know what I'm doing first. It's the $20 for 1 hour because that's way more valuable for my time. And just making those kind of like, what do we consider to be value objective and published everywhere for people to see, helps give a bit of that transparency back to the business. Selfishly, when I ask for something, that's what I care about most. But most people, I would hope, are mature enough when they're shown, well, for the business that you work for, here's what actually matters in the grand scheme of things. Like I said, I think earlier in the call, I'm perfectly happy for my procurement request to wait for a few weeks so that we can get busy and the team can focus their time on end of quarter activities. I understand that. If I'm just being told, no, this isn't important, to be honest, that's personally offensive. And that would make me not buy in as a business partner to the work the legal team does or the intake and prioritization process. But taking this approach of effort over value and communicating that value out in a way that everyone understands, it just gives you a very streamlined set of tasks visually on the board that your team can just justify the time they're taking and the effort they're doing, because there's a clear return on investment focus now, which, given the way that the business world is, ROI is becoming a much hotter and hotter topic. And if you can objectively prove that your team is nailing it on the ROI metrics, that's going to look very good for both your partners, yourselves, and the rest of the business.
Great. Next up, we have what we call the sequential method. So this is one that you guys might be a little bit more familiar with. It's really just a step-by-step approach to project management. So you would be taking that larger body of work, creating a task list, really breaking down that larger project into smaller, manageable tasks, and gathering all those subtasks and everything into one list. Then you can kind of identify, what of those sequential steps needs to come before the next. So identifying any dependencies that those smaller pieces have, and making sure that you can get those out of the way so that way you can unblock that next larger piece of work. And then finally, just really putting all of this into almost like a diagram or mapping it out visually, just so you can see the flow. I know in Prioritize, we do have what we call our task cards. There are those overarching bodies of work, and then within it, you can kind of have those subtasks. So it might not be as much of like a visual, diagram that you can have, but it still does break them down and just helps you kind of see, what should come before the next component of your work. Jonathan, did you have anything from a legal perspective to add to kind of the sequential method of breaking down those larger pieces?
No, just that it's really important to do, because it's really difficult to understand what you need to do in your project if you don't know what the next step that you need to take is, and figuring out what the various next steps are can provide enlightenment as to what you should be working on and how you should be managing your project.
All right, and then finally, the getting things done methodology. So this really kind of wraps up everything we've been talking to in one approach. The name's kind of silly because it feels really straightforward, but like that's exactly what it is. It's just helping you achieve that almost stress-free productivity through a few key steps. So it could also be more of like an individual approach as well. I know a few of these pieces have been throughout your entire team, but this can be applied to even your personal task list, honestly. So you're going to start off, you want to capture anything that crosses your mind. Nothing's too big, nothing's too small, and you just want to have all of that live in almost like that centralized inbox. So you just have a look at everything on your to-do list that might be stressing you out that you want to get through. Second component is like really clarifying that. So documenting and processing, what you've captured into those clear next steps. You could even use some of those components from the sequential method of just seeing, what needs to come next to get clear on that goal. Third is organizing it. To Tom's point earlier on, the most critical way of like really being productive and getting these pieces done is organizing it all into the right place. So get the dates on the calendar, delegate action items to your colleagues, file any relevant reference materials, and just organizing it so you have all of that in one central spot and you can easily reference any supporting, materials or dates. And then review. So frequently looking over, updating, and revising those lists. It's even, good to do that maybe at the end of your day. You can look at everything that you've tackled and managed, and that can kind of help it seem a little bit less overwhelming. And then you can also do like a bigger weekly review. So just looking back, everything that's off the list, maybe new pieces that have come onto the list, and just re-going through those steps. And then finally is engaging with it. So this is really just getting that work done, being able to check it off the list, and starting with that most important stuff first, and then using the systems to really understand what needs to get done and when. So it feels like it has more steps than the other ones, but it really is as simple as just getting a clear look at everything that you're being asked to do and then tackling it bit by bit. Anything I'm missing there, Tom?
Well, no, what I particularly just love about this, it does bring us back full circle to kind of one of the things I said at the start of the call, which is you can speak to anybody who have their different opinion on we should work in an agile manner. We should take this sequential waterfall approach because this is such a big project. There's so many moving parts. We can't afford to miss one. It needs to land. You can talk about stat ranking value versus effort all you want, but at the end of the day, all we're talking about is we have a list of things that we need to get done. And we have to decide what's important to do now, figure out how to do it and who, and just get it done. You can have any framework that you want, but at the end of the day, it's focus on what works for you and your people, whether it's individuals on your team, yourself, how you interact with the wider org, and what works for those people. One of the biggest failings is we try to go in consulting and just put in a cookie cutter process repeatedly. It doesn't work. It's every org's different, every person's different in that org. At the end of the day, they'll have their own variation on what is this method of just getting things done. The key part is to try and make that work for everybody in your org, structured as much as possible so that you get that transparency through your tools, but still allow the people the flexibility in clarifying. Clarifying could mean one thing to me, one thing to Jonathan in terms of information we need. Organizing, get that in one place. That could be prioritized internally for us. That could be finalized for one of you, depending on the work you're doing. Reviewing it, how frequently? It doesn't matter. You can do it weekly, daily, monthly, as long as you're doing it in a way that works for you. That's kind of the key focus, I guess, of what the message I'd like to get across from this webinar is if you ever are on a webinar and someone says this is the best way to manage your business in your time, I would just suggest signing off and clawing back some of your time because whatever you're about to hear is not going to be valuable for you. Sit down, really think about what matters for the business, what are the people I'm working with, and how do we maximize their potential, and then codify and repeat that as it works for your business, I guess is the best thing I could say. And at its core, that is getting things done, to be honest.
We do have a few questions that came through the chat. Feel free to throw in any with these last few minutes remaining that we can answer for you. And then we will be sending out this slide deck afterwards. But we just linked out some resources, some of which are LinkSquare's resources on just our take on project management and how it applies to the legal function, as well as a few links to some of those methods that we touched on earlier. Okay, so just a few questions with the last few minutes. Any tips for getting really that buy-in on implementing either a project management tool or one of those frameworks? I'll open this up to either you, Jonathan, or Tom. Any tips on getting that organizational buy-in?
Yep, absolutely. Go in and ask people what's not working for them. I could think of many ways I'd like to change the way that our engineering organization works today. But if I just try to do that in a vacuum as kind of a top-down approach, I can guarantee you that it's going to fail and I'll have a bunch of very, very unhappy engineers on my hand. Ask questions, right? It's at the end of the day, it's you've identified a problem in the business. Ask if that's a problem for other people. They may have different problems. Pushing them, asking questions, really diving in. It's like the Socratic method. Just ask why, to really get to the core of an issue. And a lot of times you'll find that we all share some of the same problems when it comes to working with each other, just from different lenses and perspectives and viewpoints that are solved by the same solution. And if you can come to that agreement with somebody before even pitching buy-in on a process, you're basically making them say, we should do this in their own words. Really, it's making people think and believe for themselves before you even introduce the idea of changing how you work together is, I'd say, probably the most effective method that I've had of trying to affect change in organizations. It's not me coming in and telling you what to do. You've come to that epiphany by yourself, and now we're agreeing on the next best path forwards. It's far more effective than coming in and just saying, this is bad, we're going to change it, here's how.
Yeah. And last one, this one's for you, Jonathan. How do you feel that legal project management has improved that communication within your team or even within the business with those other stakeholders?
Yeah, I think, within the team, we actually do a review on a weekly basis, all of our outstanding projects. So what I've liked about it is the folks who might not be assigned to a project can learn about the project, understand it's out there, and then invariably somebody's going to come up with a similar project. They'll have a little bit of insight about how to tackle the problem because maybe the next time they'll actually be managing it. It also just makes sure that nothing slips through the cracks. It allows us to make sure that we understand who's got what and who's doing what next. So that has really minimized what is like slipping through the cracks that folks might have otherwise. Some of our business stakeholders might have been questioning where is this? Why isn't this done? It makes sure that we can fill in those gaps. And if somebody's hasn't picked something up, or they haven't done the thing they were supposed to do, we can talk to them about accountability there. So just having that ability to review as a team and have the whole universe of what we're working on has just been really, really valuable. And then the ability to get back to stakeholders and have all of their projects in front of you so you can talk intelligently about them when you need to next communicate with the stakeholder, or if you need to communicate updates, having that all in one place and having the status on each of them has been really, really helpful.
Great. All right. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists, Jonathan and Tom. I know I learned a lot today, at least for, how I should be using our prioritized internal intake form. And thank you to everyone for joining. We'll send out the recording and, some resources and stuff for follow-up, but thank you.